So I'm excited to introduce our next guest. Our next speaker is going to be Josh Bersin. Josh founded Bersin in 2001 to provide research and advisory services focused on corporate learning. He's responsible for Bersin by Deloitte's long-term strategy and market eminence. Josh is a frequent speaker at industry events and has been quoted on talent acquisition and management topics in key media including Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, BBC Radio, CBS Radio, and a fine organization called National Public Radio. He is a popular blogger for Forbes.com and has been a columnist since 2007 for Chief Learning Officer magazine. And let's all give it up. You're going to get tons of data. And Josh, welcome to the stage. All right.
I was inspired by Lisa's presentation about her husband working with her all day at work. In my experience, if my wife had worked with me all day, I wouldn't be here today. We would have been fighting the entire time. What I'm going to do is, most of you know that I'm really an analyst and really an engineer and have studied and learned a lot about HR and people in business through many, many parts of my career. And I'm going to spend about a half an hour explaining to you, what do you do if you don't like your Glassdoor rating? Because it's not an easy problem to solve. And I do want to also thank Glassdoor for inviting me back again. I was here 3 years in a row, so I've watched this conference grow. I've watched the business grow. I think Glassdoor is really an iconic company in this industry, both from the recruiting standpoint, but also from the standpoint of management and leadership and HR overall. I'll explain what I mean by that as I get going. So how do you build what I would call an irresistible organization? And happiness is a part of that, but I don't know if happiness is always something that you can figure out how to do. So let me talk a little bit about that. Before I get into the sort of the 5 keys, why do we have these issues of engagement? Why are people unhappy at work? Why is it difficult to manage organizations well? Because organizations themselves are being disrupted. Now, I know we have some folks from Uber here, and we have some very forward-thinking organizations, but most of you, and I know this because I go and I meet with large companies, most of your CEOs are waking up in the middle of the night worried about what they can do to transform your company to make it what it needs to be next. That's an issue of demographics. That's an issue of technology. That's an issue of rate of change. Companies are, by the way, Lars's little HROS thing that he's talking about, that is a disruptor to the business that I founded that is now owned by Deloitte. So this is happening all the time. And so your executives are dealing with that, plus the fact that the relationship that your employees have with your company is vastly different than most of the HR practices were designed for. You've seen the data. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that the average employee will change jobs 13 to 15 times during their career. I think it's probably more like 20. And most of us will actually change careers multiple times. And I was just on the phone this morning with some folks for some other research we're doing. I think we're reaching a point where it's make your own job, make your own compensation, make your own career environment. And how do we deal with that at work? And I'm not the only one who feels this way. 90% of the companies that we surveyed in this research with MIT said that they feel they are being disrupted. And 70% of those CEOs said, we don't have the right people, we don't have the right leaders, we don't have the right skills. So that's what's really going on today. From an employee standpoint, I believe, I'm going to show you some data in a minute that's going to kind of surprise you. I believe the biggest issue we probably have is this. We are all a little bit overwhelmed. Now, I'm a technology guy. I love playing with tools. I've been doing it since the 1970s. It is really hard to keep up. I mean, I was talking to Lars backstage about Periscope and Facebook Live, and my kids are using Snapchat. I get at least 400 or 500 emails a day from being inside of Deloitte. I log into LinkedIn. There's another 50 messages there. I go onto Twitter. People are sending me messages on there. And then I go home, and there's 15 voicemails from survey companies who want to ask me about the election. How do we keep up with all this? and as you can see, this is reality. People are basically saying, I don't know how to balance my life. I don't know where to focus. I'm not sure if I really can have a meaningful life and work. And by the way, the work environment is a little bit out of control. And I'm not saying that just from an employee standpoint. This is also an economic problem. Why do we have income inequality? Why have we adopted all of this technology, but productivity has not gone up? And as a matter of fact, this has been vexing to economists. Maybe Andrew, when he comes up here, can give you his opinion. But I think we're actually in this funny state the last couple of years where we really have a little bit too many tools. And the tools companies that are selling us these tools are selling us addictive drugs. And we're using these tools, but we're not getting more work done. So one of the things that's going on in your company, and I guarantee this is true in virtually every part of your company, is people are trying to figure out where to spend more time and what to focus on so that their productivity doesn't look like this. So this is not only an economic issue for the country and for the world, it's an issue for each organization. Now we study this a lot, and I won't spend a lot of time on this chart, but one of the projects that I work on every year now that I've been at Deloitte is this project called Human Capital Trends. We had 7,000 people respond to this, and I want to point out a couple of quick things. 92% of these 7,000 companies said, we are not organized correctly to succeed. That's basically everybody, right? I mean, that's basically every company. This is all over the world, 130 countries. And then when we ask them, do you know how to reorganize to succeed? Only 14% even had an idea of what that means. So we're in a situation now where work is moving so fast, projects, customer issues, the dynamic nature of organizations, that the structure and the roles and the job descriptions that we have are not keeping up. And so what we're building is basically organizations that are dynamic networks of teams. And that has a lot to do with why engagement and things like Glassdoor are so important. The second thing I'll point out to you is the third and fourth trends are culture and engagement. Culture is a hot topic. You know, I don't need to tell you that. Everybody who stands up here is going to talk to you about it. If you look at Google Trends, it is trending. 2 years ago, it was the most frequently searched word in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. It comes up in every conversation that I have with a large corporation, but nobody is exactly sure how to define it. Is culture the fact that you have free food for lunch? Is culture the fact that you have a flexible workplace? It turns out that it's actually something you need to define and measure as best you can, and you can do that. Engagement is the flip side of that. Engagement is the personal experience that employees have in your culture. Obviously, most of you know that if your culture is a certain way, if you're Amazon.com and you have a high-performing culture where people are working a lot of hours on behalf of customers, and the employees who come to work for you are not willing or comfortable with that environment, they're not going to be happy. Now, they may be in the wrong company, or maybe there's something you can do about it. And if you look at engagement, and this data is right from Glassdoor, it is pretty much a bell curve problem. And I've been looking at this data now for 3 or 4 years, and the Glassdoor folks have been nice enough to share it with me. It's not moving to the right. It's about the same, very slightly improved. So for all of the discussions and articles and blogs and conferences and everything else we have on engagement, it's not getting that much better. So the question you kind of have to ask yourself is, what are these companies on the right doing that I can do? Are those tech companies? Are those small companies? Are those new companies? Are those companies in California? I mean, what is it about them that makes them different? Well, I've looked at all of that data, and I've tried to figure out what are the differentiators of those companies on the right, and none of those dimensions predict those companies. The only thing that differentiates those companies on the right is leadership, and the way people are treated, and the way leadership invests in and thinks about the people in their company. I had an interesting conversation with an airline. I won't mention the name of it. An airline that had not done an engagement survey for 2 years, which blew my mind. I'll talk about engagement surveys in a minute. And they said, well, you know, we have a new CEO, and our new CEO is different, and our prior CEO was very focused on top management and top leadership. Our new CEO is focused much more on the team and trust of the team, and we're going to start doing surveys and engagement and get feedback from all of our workers. And he said, we're a little nervous about it, we don't know what's going to happen. And they started rolling it out, and he said, we found out things about our organization that we never knew before. And I guarantee you that 6 months or a year from now, this organization is going to move to the right on that curve. And this is a very successful company, one that all of you know, that's been quite highly successful for many years. Now, what does this mean, this teams thing? Let me spend a minute on that, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the issue of engagement. Your company looks like the picture on the left. I guarantee you have an org chart. We all have those. Well, Deloitte doesn't have one, actually. We don't have one of those. But the way work gets done is the picture on the right. We as human beings are physiologically wired to work in small groups. A lot of research has been done on this. For example, somebody did some actual brain research and determined that the way our brains are wired, we have at most about 100 friends that we can remember. There's about 100 people we can keep in our mind. That is why organizations like W.L. Gore and other companies split groups, plants, regional offices, sales offices into groups of 100 people. Because in 100 people, you can kind of get to know everybody. There's also research that says that you will spend 2 orders of magnitude more time with people that are within 50 meters of your desk than people that are remote. Now, I'm not saying remote work doesn't work. It actually does work. But on a regular basis, we like to communicate with people face to face, and we like to have casual conversations. That's why Jeff Bezos' rule is, if I go into a staff meeting and there's more than 2 pizzas for lunch, I break the team in half to make it smaller. So this is real. The problem is, if we operate like this and we have all these connectivity tools, we're sending messages back and forth, and we have emails, and we have Slack, and we have Twitter, and we have all these various tools, how do we make sure these teams are productive and they share information with each other and they're not competing with each other? If you look at the history of the iPod, which was the predecessor, obviously, to the technology that eventually became the iPhone, there was a company in that business long before them. It was Sony. Sony had the Walkman long before Apple had the iPod. But the problem Sony had was the Walkman group was in a silo, and there were other groups in Sony building other things, and those groups weren't talking to each other. And connecting these groups together actually is one of the most important disciplines we've found in actually creating an engaging organization. And that's why these issues of engagement and culture are so important. It's not just to get your Glassdoor rating up. It actually will make your company more productive and more profitable. By the way, relative to Glassdoor, one more thing before I get into the sort of the 5 solutions here. I also looked at the relationship, and I think Andrew did, actually Andrew did exactly the same analysis I did, and luckily we had the same result. If you look at the Glassdoor question, would you recommend your company as a place to work, which is like a net promoter question, and then you correlate the other surveys or the other questions in Glassdoor against that one, the most highly correlated question is culture and values. And you can see it's almost 4 times higher, 3 times higher than comp and benefits. So this issue of what your culture is and how you communicate your values and how you communicate your mission is very, very important to the productivity and the improvement of your own Glassdoor rating in your company. By the way, one more little thing that's sort of hot off the presses. This morning, Deloitte launched a very comprehensive study of the needs and the interests of millennials. And by the way, millennials is basically more than half the workforce around the world. And what the research found is that almost 60% of the millennials in that survey said that they would look for another job if the organization's purpose was not consistent with their personal desires and their personal needs or their personal values. So this issue of personal purpose is very important. So how do you understand all this? What do you do? Let me take a couple minutes now and give you some tips, and then I'll sort of give you some things to go away with. This is the model that we developed a couple of years ago on understanding what engages people at work. We call it simply Irresistible, and it's been written about, and you can find it on the Deloitte website. But it basically says there's 5 things that happen at work. The work itself has to be meaningful to the individual. The management has to be supportive. There has to be a great work environment, because we all have busy lives, and we have families, and we have elder care, and we have kids, and we have other things to do. There has to be growth and development, and there has to be trust and leadership. And let me just walk you through those 5 things very briefly. Number 1, meaningful work. Now, there's a lot of elements to meaningful work. One is, are you in the right job? And did the job selection process put you in the right job? I met with a company last week who told me, we don't even let people apply for jobs anymore. We show them the jobs, we let them apply for some job, and then we as recruiters look at their resumes and decide which job we think is the one that's most appropriate for them based on their experience, background, and characteristics. So that's about fit. There's also an issue of the design of work. Now, I mentioned earlier, I'm going to show you some interesting data on this. The number of hours worked in the United States has been shooting up, and I'm going to show you some sort of very sad statistics about vacation. We're taking less vacation and working more hours. We're probably spending more time dealing with our phones and then that too. Companies are now realizing we have to change the environment of work itself. Now, I think this is a particularly good example because of the big article that came out about Amazon.com in the New York Times maybe 9 months ago about what a difficult and challenging and demanding place it is to work. And by the way, Amazon.com's Glassdoor ratings are above average for most companies in their industry. So they are actually a good place to work, and people enjoy working there if they select into that environment. They have now decided that they're going to create more flexibility in the workforce and possibly reduce the number of hours of work. And by the way, I've read a lot of research on this, and that book on the right talks about it in great detail. In the retail environment, it actually creates greater productivity, greater profitability, greater sales when you overstaff the stores. Now, the actual, normal management behavior is we have too many people, we have to reduce costs, so let's reduce the number of people. Actually, what the research finds, if there are more people and they have time for slack, if they have extra time, they can clean the shelves, they can talk to customers, they can train each other, they can cross-train, they can look at where things are located, they can do things that they would not normally do. So one of the things that comes out of this research is giving people in the work environment time to do their jobs. And that obviously leads to what management does and how management helps people to focus. By the way, another piece of research I thought I'd share. This is research from Germany, where Germany has a huge manufacturing economy, and there's lots of small manufacturers. They have actually looked at the impact of working extra hours. And guess what? You don't get more productivity by working extra hours. And this was a large study of many manufacturing organizations, and they actually compared men and women, and they did some interesting analysis, and they found that somewhere around 40 to 45 hours, the curve kind of flattens out. So one of the things in this meaningful work is not only finding the right job, but making sure that the work gives you an environment that you can actually get it accomplished. And that gets to this last one that I just have to share with you. This is an organization that started up this year that we've been working with that is monitoring vacation. And it is really a sad state of affairs that from the year about 1998 to 2016, the average vacation taken in the United States went from 20 days to 16 days. So that data I showed you earlier about the overwhelmed employee has to be true. We are working more days, we are working more hours, we are working harder, and we're not getting the productivity we need. And as you can see, not only are we taking less vacation, but 658 million days of vacation went unused, and almost 220 million of them were lost. So that's another example of why we have to look at work and work itself. Number two, management. I'm not going to talk about performance management. I'm not going to talk about performance appraisals. I'm not going to talk about ratings. All that stuff has been out there. You've all been working on it. I'm sure you're all going through your own reinvention. Managers have to talk to their people. They have to spend time with them, and they have to help them focus. And as all of you know who've been managers or recently became managers, it is not an easy job. Most people, when they get promoted from individual contributor to manager, is a career change. It's not a job change. All of a sudden, your role is completely different. And so one of the important things that's happening in this new digital world of work today is HR organizations are building tools to help people constantly have conversations with their managers. It's funny, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to organizations that told me that their performance management process is like a drive-by shooting. At the end of the year, something comes by that they didn't hear about all year. Because managers are afraid to talk to people. That's actually from a Deloitte organization, but I won't mention who it is. But this is part of this management, and organizations are getting this. I mean, I'm talking to a lot of big companies. GE which is very well known for the rank and yank, up or out culture, has totally changed the way they manage people. GE, through a series of hackathons and redesigning of the performance process, is basically teaching managers to have regular check-ins. There are tools, there's data being collected, and they're teaching managers how to coach their employees to do less. Don't give them more work to do, give them less work to do. Give them the freedom to skip meetings, not go to conference calls, spend more time with customers, and work on what's important. That's part of building the simply irresistible world of management. Which also changes the world of evaluation, by the way. If you're going to let people spend time on the things that are important, you're going to have to evaluate them differently. And as most of you know, the whole world of how you evaluate people has changed. I love this one from Juniper, and Juniper was a pioneer on this. At Juniper, at the end of the year, you are not evaluated only on your contribution to the company. You're also evaluated on whether you improved your own capabilities, whether you built a great network internally, and whether you worked on your next job and figuring out what your next job is. And that creates a holistic sense of what my job is and what I'm expected to do that supports the organization. I don't know what Juniper's Glassdoor rating is, but I guarantee you it's pretty high. And by the way, part of this is fixing this. This is the traditional role that we managed feedback. Once a year we did an engagement survey. Once a year we did a performance appraisal. Obviously it's too slow. So there's an army of tools out there now and techniques to get feedback on a regular basis. We had an organization at our research conference back in May. There was a very large healthcare company with 275 hospitals. They started doing active weekly pulse surveys of their employees. She told me, the woman who ran this told me they were petrified. They had no idea what kind of information they were going to get back. She said within only a couple of weeks, information started to surface about things in the work environment, safety issues, management issues that they had no idea were going on, and they gave the information right back to the managers so they could act on it. So that's a critical part of this. Just one more example on that one is Deloitte. Now, Deloitte is a very high-performing, very demanding organization. 275,000 people, roughly. It's probably gone up since the last time I checked. Running around doing work for clients, very busy on planes, and actually had a very traditional process. A new process that was designed 2 years ago that's now been rolled out asks every employee these 8 questions, these very carefully selected 8 questions. And based on the results of these 8 questions, you can tell the performance, the financial performance of that team. What this is showing is that the orange bars are the people that scored the highest on the 8 questions. Those are the highest performing teams from a financial basis. So getting feedback from people isn't just a nice thing to do for employee engagement. It will teach you things about the performance of your organization and the actual performance of the leaders in your organization that you didn't know before. Number 3 is the work environment. This is what everybody likes to talk about the most. You know, let's just have an open office and let's get all sorts of cool food and let's have a foosball table and let's, give everybody Fridays off and, maybe have a cocktail hour in the afternoon. Those are all great things, but you don't have to do that. This company, Quicken Loans, is one of the best places to work in just about every survey you'll find. This is a company in one of the most traditional, boring businesses you can think of. I mean, it's an important one, but it's a very traditional business. They basically refinance mortgages. They're located in Detroit. They're not in California, okay? So they're kind of old school in their area. But if you look at what they do and the way they manage their people, Quicken Loans has a book called The Isms of Quicken Loans. And it's a cartoon book. It's about a 60-page book of cartoons with stories and examples of all of the great things they do for customers and how they treat customers and what to do and what not to do. And it exemplifies storytelling and a customer-centric mentality that this company just absolutely lives by. And I've met the woman that runs HR for this company. She's an incredible person. So my message here is that you can build a great work environment without being in Silicon Valley and without having billions of dollars to spend on a new building. Part of the work environment is being healthy. Now, I know Arianna Huffington's speaking a little bit later, and I'm kind of anxious to hear what she has to say about her new company, but let me tell you something I've learned. If you think about I was going to build this chart out, but it just kind of came all together. Most of us have a health and wellness group in HR, and that group was probably designed to probably reduce the cost of insurance, is really what it is. And you have employee assistance programs, and you have insurance programs, and what you find is that over time, people realize that's not enough. We need also to help people become fit. We need to give them information on diet. We need to give them exercise tips. We need to give them, maybe we need to give them an annual health check for free. All that stuff has been added to basically the benefits over the last 10 years. Now we're talking about mental wellness, yoga classes, mindfulness classes, tips on how to manage your time, tips on helping you get along at work. And finally, we're getting to this issue of what does it really mean to have peak performance in this organization? I think this entire industry is moving. And I think this issue with this whole topic that started with health and wellness is becoming a critical issue of employee engagement and employee performance. And there's actually some really exciting tools now in the market that will allow you to give your employees the tools to have competitions for who walked the most number of miles this week, to work on projects together, to have contests, and do various things to improve health and wellness in a social way. At Deloitte, there's an application being developed called Vital that actually goes into the time and expense system, and it looks at your travel and your hourly bill, and it determines how much time you spent with clients and how many cities you were in a given week and so forth. And it nudges you, and it gives you tips, and it says, you know, you're at the 90th percentile in travel and hours worked amongst your work group. You might want to think about taking it a little bit more easy. So it doesn't tell you not to do it, but it gives you ideas. And I think this is a very critical part of the work environment. The fourth issue is growth, development and growth. And let me tell you one story about that one. You don't have to have a corporate university. You don't have to spend $100 million a year on training to create a company where people can grow. You actually have to build a culture of development. This company, Wegmans, a lot of you probably don't know Wegmans, but if you live on the East Coast, you definitely do. Wegmans is, again, at the top of all the best places to work lists, and I've visited with them, I know the CHRO. Wegmans has a philosophy that when you get out of high school and you are looking for a job, if you come to work for Wegmans part-time, they will make an agreement with you that if you do a good job at Wegmans and you stick around and you come back summer after summer, they will pay for you to go to college if you keep working there. You will then get a job as a manager of one of the parts of Wegmans, and you will eventually have the opportunity to help them open the next Wegmans. They don't have a lot of computers, they don't use a lot of technology, they're not into that at all. In fact, they have meetings where nobody opens their laptop, which I actually thought was very refreshing. But this topic of growth and personal development and education is core to their entire employment brand. And so it's so strong that the CHRO of Wegmans, and it's a family-owned business, by the way, told me that we open new stores because we have employees that need new jobs. And therefore, we're going to open a new store. In other words, the career development at Wegmans is driving the business strategy because it's so important to them that they offer people this opportunity. And of course, that means there's all sorts of coaching and development and ongoing support for people in their careers. And if you look at millennials, slicing the data by millennials, in the data from Glassdoor, millennials rate career development and opportunities as the #1 driver of your employment brand. So think hard about that one. We've got lots of tools to help you do that. Are you providing the right level of mobility, growth, and development in your organization? The final one is leadership. And let me just spend 1 minute on that. We know that leadership's important. I think Andrew's going to show some data on leadership relative to CEOs. Two things about leadership. Number one, mission and purpose. This research, which was done probably 10 years ago, studied the financial performance of companies that define their businesses through purpose, mission, and stakeholder values, not just financially. And I won't mention any names, but there's actually been some companies in the press just this last week, that are suffering from this problem. Those companies were 8 times higher performing companies over a 20-year period than the S&P 500. They were 4 times higher performing companies than the Jim Collins Good to Great companies, which was kind of one of the iconic studies of business performance. So this issue of inspiration and mission and purpose is critical. A good example of that I just want to cite is Aetna, and this is right out of the New York Times. In the 2 years ago or so, when Obamacare was passed and the insurance companies realized they were going to be selling insurance to consumers, the CEO of Aetna said, you know, we're turning into a consumer company. We need to make sure our consumer experience is great. And he visited the call centers in Aetna. He found they had a 40 to a 45% turnover rate. Most of the people in the call centers were being paid below minimum wage. Many of them could not afford health care, certainly not Aetna health care. And he said, this is going to change. And he had a spiritual awakening of his own, and he went back and he instituted mindfulness and yoga classes, and he gave everybody a raise, and he gave them benefits, and did a whole bunch of things to improve the mission and the purpose and the culture of the customer service organization and the call centers. Their retention numbers shot up, and a year later, as he states in this article, he believes Aetna's bottom line went up by almost 2% as a result of focusing on the mission, purpose, and values of that part of his workforce. And every company has the opportunity to do that. Let me leave you with one final thought, and then I'll wrap up. You can't do this by sitting around and designing another HR program. It's not going to work. The only way you can do these 5 things is by studying and listening to and empathizing with your employees. We call that design thinking. If you're not out there listening to them, if you're not getting feedback from them on a regular basis, if you're not seeing what it takes, the first week in the job, the first month in the job, the first quarter in the job, if you don't understand that, you can't necessarily design the right solution. So one of the most critical things, I think, as you move forward and think about how to become a simply irresistible organization, is thinking about and learning and studying the entire employee experience in your company, which is really what design thinking is all about. So those are the 5 keys: meaningful work, supportive management, a flexible, humane work environment, providing development and career growth, and of course, inspirational leadership. And I guarantee you, if you can cover those 5 areas, your Glassdoor ratings will go up. Thank you very much for the opportunity.